Close your eyes and allow your breathing to slow naturally as your mind begins drifting gently backward through time, far beyond modern noise and electric light, until the air itself feels heavier, smokier, and filled with the distant echo of wooden wheels rolling across uneven stone, soft footsteps moving through narrow lanes, and the faint ringing of church bells waking a sleeping city. London in the early 17th century slowly reveals itself not as a polished capital but as a living, breathing maze of timber houses, crooked streets, crowded marketplaces, and restless human ambition, where every breath carries the scent of coal smoke, river mist, damp wood, animal sweat, and burning tallow candles drifting upward into a gray, restless sky as the Thames flows quietly beside the city, carrying merchant ships, fishing boats, and whispered secrets of distant lands, while fog curls low over the water, wrapping the docks in a dreamlike hush where sailors unload barrels of spice, fabric, sugar, and unfamiliar treasures under lantern light, their shadows stretching long against wooden piers, while gulls cry softly overhead and ropes creak with the rhythm of the tide, creating a steady lullaby of motion and patience as the city stirs awake, not with sudden noise but with layered sounds stacking gently like distant echoes, a baker sliding loaves into a brick oven, a blacksmith stoking glowing coals, a milkmaid guiding her cow through muddy streets, and apprentices sweeping yesterday's dust from shop thresholds, while children still wrapped in thin blankets sleep curled beside flickering hearths, unaware that outside their doors history itself is constantly unfolding through small unnoticed moments where survival depends on routine, discipline, and quiet resilience. As London grows larger each year, swelling with newcomers seeking work, fortune, safety, or escape from rural poverty, compressing thousands of lives into narrow alleyways where sunlight struggles to reach the ground and every building leans inward as if whispering to its neighbor, creating tunnels of shadow and shelter where footsteps echo like soft drums, guiding travelers through winding corridors that smell of damp timber, old smoke, spilled ale, and river water blending into a signature scent that defines the city's identity and memory, while overhead wooden balconies nearly touch, allowing neighbors to pass baskets, notes, and gossip from window to window, building invisible social bridges across the crowded streets where voices drift like drifting leaves, blending languages, accents, laughter, arguments, prayers, and bargaining into a constant murmuring chorus that never truly sleeps. Yet within this layered chaos exists a quiet rhythm, a slow, dependable heartbeat driven by daylight, seasons, market days, church bells, and human habit, guiding each citizen, whether rich or poor, into predictable cycles of labor, rest, hunger, hope, and endurance, forming a living organism larger than any single person, where each small action becomes part of the city's collective breath. And as morning light filters faintly through smoky air, illuminating drifting particles like golden dust, the city prepares for another long day of survival, trade, struggle, and silent dreaming, inviting you gently deeper into its winding streets where stories wait patiently inside every doorway, every footstep, every breath of wind, and every fading echo of the past. As the pale morning light spreads slowly across the tangled rooftops of 17th-century London, the city awakens like a vast breathing creature stretching its limbs after a restless night. Wooden shutters creak open one by one, thin curtains flutter slightly in the cool air, and the faint smell of baking bread begins drifting outward from small brick ovens hidden behind narrow shopfronts, where bakers already work with flour-covered hands, kneading heavy dough by candlelight, long before most families rise from their straw mattresses, and nearby a water carrier balances sloshing buckets across a wooden yoke, moving carefully over uneven stones while muttering softly to himself, knowing that clean water is precious and every spilled drop matters, because the Thames, though grand and flowing, is thick with waste, refuse, and unseen danger, making drinking directly from it a risk that many still take out of necessity. And as carts begin rolling through the lanes, their iron rims scraping against stone, creating rhythmic echoes that bounce between leaning buildings, the first market traders arrive, pulling crates of onions, apples, dried fish, bundles of herbs, and rough cloth, setting up small stalls beneath patched canvas awnings while calling quietly to early customers, their voices blending into a low, steady hum that rises gradually like distant surf washing against the shore of human activity. And above them church bells ring in slow, measured intervals, marking time for prayer, labor, and Memory reminding every soul that the structure of life is guided not by clocks but by sound tradition and habit. And as apprentices hurry along clutching ledgers, tools, or wrapped parcels, they weave carefully between horses, dogs, wandering chickens, and barefoot children who dart playfully across the street chasing rolling hoops or bits of discarded wood, their laughter briefly lifting the heaviness of the air before fading again into the background rhythm of survival where each person carries invisible burdens of rent, hunger, disease, ambition, and hope, forming silent emotional currents flowing beneath the visible bustle of trade and movement. And within cramped homes, families begin their day crowded together in single rooms where beds are shared by parents, children, sometimes boarders as well. The hearth still warm from last night's embers used to heat thin porridge made from oats, water, and occasional scraps of salted meat, while mothers stir slowly, conserving fuel because firewood and coal cost money, and smoke fills lungs, darkening ceilings with soot that never fully disappears, leaving every wall stained by generations of breathing, cooking, and endurance. And clothing is layered and heavy, patched, repeatedly handed down from older siblings or purchased secondhand from street vendors selling garments whose histories are unknown, carrying the faded smell of countless bodies and weathered journeys, yet still treasured because warmth means survival in damp London winters where cold creeps silently into bones and joints, causing stiffness, pain, and illness that doctors struggle to treat with their limited understanding, relying on herbs, prayer, bloodletting, and superstition rather than true science. And as sunlight climbs slightly higher, filtering through smoke, haze, and fog, the streets grow increasingly crowded with laborers heading toward docks, workshops, construction sites, breweries, slaughterhouses, printing houses, and warehouses where long hours await them with little guarantee of safety because accidents are common. Heavy beams fall, ropes snap, fires flare suddenly, and injuries often become infected, leading to lingering sickness or death. Yet work must continue because without wages families cannot eat, and landlords show little mercy for late rent regardless of illness or misfortune. And near the river the docks pulse with global energy as ships from the Netherlands, Spain, the Americas, Africa, and the Mediterranean unload sugar, tobacco, spices, timber, fabrics, metals, and strange unfamiliar objects that spark curiosity among dockworkers who glimpse the wider world only through cargo crates and sailor stories whispered between heavy lifts, while seagulls circle overhead shrieking sharply and the river itself laps against wooden pilings carrying floating debris, bits of straw, broken barrels, and drifting waste slowly downstream toward the sea where the city's remnants dissolve into endless water, and taverns begin opening their doors early, offering small beer safer than water and thick stews to laborers needing strength before long shifts, as wooden benches fill with rough voices sharing rumors, gossip, political whispers, and exaggerated tales, while pipes release thin streams of smoke curling lazily toward dark rafters stained by decades of fires, laughter, arguments, and spilled ale, forming invisible layers of memory embedded within the wood itself. And nearby in quieter districts merchants open ledgers, counting coins, adjusting inventory, planning shipments, calculating profits, while servants sweep entryways, polish brass, prepare breakfasts, and tend fires, moving efficiently through large homes where heavy curtains soften outside noise and expensive carpets cushion footsteps, creating small islands of comfort separated sharply from the crowded poverty only streets away, illustrating the immense social divide that defines London life, where wealth brings safety, warmth, and opportunity, while poverty brings constant exposure to hunger, disease, violence, and uncertainty. Yet both classes coexist tightly within the same dense urban maze, hearing each other's lives through thin walls and shared streets, creating unavoidable awareness of inequality that shapes attitudes, resentment, aspiration, and social tension. And as midday approaches, the markets reach peak intensity with shouts, bargaining, laughter, and clattering scales blending into a vibrant, chaotic orchestra where customers inspect fish, pressing fingers into pale flesh, smelling for freshness, knowing that spoiled food can cause violent sickness, yet options remain limited without refrigeration, forcing many to gamble daily with health, while bakers sell crusty loaves still warm from ovens, and children weave between legs, offering small services, carrying baskets, delivering messages, shining shoes, or simply begging with hollow eyes and practiced pleas that echo through human conscience, often ignored by those hardened by daily Exposure to suffering while a few toss copper coins sparingly balancing compassion against their own fragile financial security, and above the market's pigeons flutter suddenly when a cart passes too close scattering feathers dust and brief chaos before resettling again upon wooden beams rooftops and church ledges, their constant presence reminding citizens of how closely humans share space with animals in this era where livestock roam freely, pigs root through refuse, horses dominate transport, dogs guard property, and cats hunt rats whose unchecked population spreads fleas and disease, forming invisible threats beneath everyday normalcy. And as the afternoon heat rises slightly during warmer months, the smell of the city intensifies, combining sweat, manure, smoke, fish refuse, stagnant water, and tanned leather, creating an odor that modern noses would find overwhelming, yet Londoners themselves grow accustomed, developing sensory tolerance as survival demands adaptation rather than complaint, while handkerchiefs infused with herbs, lavender or vinegar, are sometimes pressed against noses by wealthier citizens attempting small defenses against bad air, which many believe causes illness, under the theory of miasma shaping health practices and city planning decisions for decades to come. And within narrow alleyways sunlight barely reaches the ground, leaving perpetual dampness where moss grows on stone walls and puddles linger long after rain, providing breeding grounds for insects while residents navigate carefully, stepping over open drains, carrying waste toward the river, sometimes slipping, sometimes splashed by careless passers-by, prompting curses, laughter, and resigned sighs, because such incidents are unavoidable in a city lacking modern sanitation infrastructure, where chamber pots are emptied directly into streets, often accompanied by shouted warnings of a guard as low, echoing upward as a final courtesy before unpleasant rain descends onto unlucky pedestrians below, reinforcing the constant awareness that cleanliness is a luxury rarely achieved and frequently compromised by density and limited technology. And inside workshops artisans hammer, stitch, carve, mold, and assemble goods with skilled hands, guided by apprentices who observe, mimic, and gradually master trades through years of disciplined repetition, building identity, pride, and social belonging within guild systems that regulate quality, pricing, and membership, providing stability yet also limiting upward mobility for outsiders, women, and the poor who struggle to access formal training pathways while still contributing heavily through informal labor, invisible yet essential to city function. And printers operate heavy presses, spreading ink onto pages that carry news pamphlets, religious tracts, political arguments, and sensational stories about crimes, disasters, and scandals, feeding public curiosity and shaping collective imagination, while literacy slowly increases, allowing broader segments of society to engage with written information, altering how ideas travel through the city, replacing purely oral rumor networks with printed influence that accelerates social change, slowly reshaping thought patterns and awareness beyond immediate neighborhoods. And as evening approaches, shadows lengthen across crooked streets, casting dramatic silhouettes of chimney signboards, hanging lanterns, and passing figures, while shopkeepers begin closing shutters, counting remaining stock, and securing doors with heavy wooden bars, knowing that night brings increased risk of theft, assault, and disorder, as street lighting remains minimal, relying on scattered lanterns and moonlight, leaving large portions of the city cloaked in darkness, where footsteps echo unpredictably and unknown shapes lurk in doorways, alley mouths, and behind stacked barrels, heightening tension and awareness among travelers who quicken pace, clutch purses, and stay close to familiar routes, while watchmen patrol, intermittently calling out the hour with halberds in hand, though their effectiveness varies widely depending on diligent sobriety and neighborhood support. And families gather again around hearths, sharing simple evening meals, exchanging stories of the day, children listening wide-eyed to tales of distant ships, strange animals, royal rumors, and neighborhood drama, while parents quietly calculate expenses, plan tomorrow's tasks, worry about sickness, debt, and winter fuel, as candlelight flickers across tired faces, carving soft shadows that emphasize the fragile boundary between security and hardship that defines most lives in this era, where a single accident, illness, or failed harvest can push families into irreversible poverty, yet resilience persists through community mutual aid, church charity, informal lending, and shared knowledge passed quietly between neighbors, forming invisible safety nets woven from human connection rather than formal institutions. And as the city gradually settles into nighttime hush punctuated by distant tavern laughter, barking dogs, rattling carts, and occasional shouted disputes, the air cools slightly, allowing fog to thicken along the riverbanks, creeping into streets, curling around doorframes, lampposts, and sleeping figures like a slow-living blanket, muffling sound and softening edges, creating a dreamlike atmosphere where time seems suspended and imagination drifts freely backward and forward, linking past, present, and future within the same breath, while inside crowded rooms bodies rest close together, sharing warmth, breathing in rhythmic unison, forming small islands of human intimacy within the massive restless organism of London itself, which never truly sleeps but simply shifts into quieter, subtler patterns of motion, memory, and anticipation, waiting patiently for the next cycle of dawn to begin again, carrying forward endless stories layered upon stone, timber, smoke, water, and human spirit. As night fades into another uncertain dawn, the invisible presence of illness lingers quietly within every breath, every shadow, every shared surface, reminding the people of 17th-century London that survival is never guaranteed and health itself feels like a temporary visitor rather than a permanent state, because disease moves silently through crowded homes, damp alleys, shared water buckets, and flea-infested bedding carried unknowingly from hand to hand, cloth to cloth, breath to breath, forming unseen pathways that connect strangers into fragile biological networks long before science understands their existence. And the most feared word, whispered in anxious tones, remains plague, a word heavy with memory loss, mourning, and sudden disappearance that can empty entire streets within weeks, transforming vibrant neighborhoods into sealed corridors of silence where red crosses painted upon doors signal quarantined families, trapped inside with their sickness, prayers, and fading hope, while watchmen guard exits, preventing escape, forcing neighbors to listen helplessly as coughing, crying, and final breaths echo faintly through wooden walls and drifting fog, creating emotional scars that linger long after the epidemic passes, shaping collective fear, behavior, and superstition for generations. And when outbreaks occur, carts roll slowly through streets, calling out for the dead, collecting wrapped bodies stacked like fragile bundles destined for mass graves beyond city edges, where names dissolve into numbers and grief becomes communal rather than personal, because loss arrives too frequently to mourn individually, yet each household quietly remembers faces, voices, laughter, and shared meals now erased, leaving empty spaces in beds and at tables that no amount of time fully fills. And beyond plague, other illnesses remain constant companions. Smallpox leaves scarred faces and blindness, typhus thrives in filthy bedding, tuberculosis wastes bodies slowly over months, and infected wounds often prove fatal because bacteria remain unknown and antiseptic practices non-existent, while childbirth carries real risk for mothers and infants alike, making every birth both celebration and gamble. And physicians armed with limited tools rely on bloodletting, purging, herbal tonics, astrology, and spiritual explanations, attempting to balance imagined bodily humors rather than addressing microscopic causes, while barber surgeons perform amputations with saws, heated irons, and crude bandaging in rooms filled with screams, the smell of blood, and the heavy weight of irreversible consequence. Yet many patients still submit because pain endured offers at least a chance of survival compared to doing nothing at all, and hospitals, overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and unsanitary, often worsen conditions rather than healing, turning them into places of last resort rather than recovery, shaping public mistrust of institutional medicine and reinforcing reliance on home remedies, folk knowledge, and prayer networks pass through families and communities where grandmothers share recipes of boiled herbs, poultices, compresses, and whispered charms, blending tradition with hope, while churches organize fasting prayer services asking divine mercy during outbreaks, interpreting disease as punishment, test, or mystery beyond human control, which reinforces moral discipline, fear of sin, and obedience, shaping daily behavior through spiritual lens rather than scientific understanding. And amid this constant threat of sickness. Londoners develop psychological resilience rooted in acceptance, normalization, and forward momentum, learning not to dwell excessively on mortality because excessive fear would paralyze daily function. So humor, gossip, routine, and distraction become emotional survival tools, allowing minds to shift focus away from looming danger while still maintaining cautious habits like burning herbs, opening windows, avoiding strangers during outbreaks, and carrying scented cloths believed to filter bad air, providing small illusions of control within uncontrollable systems. And children grow up witnessing illness, death, and recovery as ordinary events, shaping maturity early and normalizing impermanence in ways modern minds rarely encounter, forming hardened yet adaptive emotional frameworks where attachment remains deep but grief becomes layered rather than consuming, because life continues relentlessly regardless of individual tragedy. And even during plague years, economic pressure forces many to keep working, risking exposure because hunger poses immediate threat compared to invisible infection, creating tragic ethical trade-offs where families choose between safety and survival, reinforcing class disparity as wealthy flee to countryside estates while poor remain trapped within contaminated neighborhoods, absorbing disproportionate mortality, deepening social inequality and resentment while also generating narratives of fate, injustice, and divine hierarchy that permeate cultural memory and storytelling. And when epidemics finally recede, relief arrives slowly, accompanied by lingering trauma, empty homes, abandoned businesses, orphan children, and altered social networks, requiring gradual rebuilding of trust, trade, and emotional stability, while city authorities attempt to improve sanitation, quarantine protocols, burial practices, and fire safety. Though progress remains limited by technology, politics, and funding, yet each crisis plants small seeds of reform that slowly accumulate across decades, shaping future urban planning and public health awareness, even if immediate impact feels minimal to everyday citizens whose focus remains on feeding families, paying rent, and avoiding next unseen threat. And beneath medical uncertainty lies a constant sensory awareness of bodily vulnerability, where coughs draw anxious glances, fevers prompt whispered prayers, and unexplained pains trigger fear of escalation, encouraging stoic endurance rather than complaint, because complaining does not cure illness, and emotional restraint becomes culturally valued as a sign of strength, faith, and maturity, shaping how people express pain, love, worry, and loss, often internalizing emotions rather than openly processing them, while community support manifests through practical acts, delivering soup, cleaning rooms, caring for children during sickness, reinforcing bonds of mutual dependence that quietly sustain neighborhoods during crisis, forming invisible safety networks stronger than formal institutions. And as dusk returns once again over rooftops, chimneys, and drifting fog, the city exhales collective tension, settling into another uncertain night where every breath remains a gift, every morning remains a fragile victory, and every heartbeat carries silent gratitude for continued existence, reminding the people of London that life persists not through comfort or certainty but through adaptability, courage, habit, and shared humanity, flowing steadily like the Thames beneath bridges, carrying both memory and hope forward into tomorrow. As the long summer of 1666 stretches across London, with dry timber beams creaking quietly beneath relentless sun and warm winds drifting through tightly packed alleys, the city unknowingly prepares for one of the most transformative moments in its history, because beneath ordinary routines of baking bread, carrying water, hammering iron, and counting coins, a fragile balance exists between human control and elemental power. And in the early hours of a single night, a small unattended flame inside a humble bakery ignites wooden structures already dried to tinder by weeks of heat, allowing fire to leap rapidly from beam to beam, roof to roof, driven by strong winds that funnel through narrow streets, turning entire corridors into roaring tunnels of heat, sparks, and collapsing embers, while residents awaken to crackling, thunderous noise, smoke thick enough to choke breath, and glowing skies that mimic sunrise in the darkest hours, forcing families to flee barefoot, clutching children, documents, and whatever small possessions they can carry, while animals panic, carts jam roads, and church bells ring frantically, creating chaotic symphonies of alarm, fear, confusion, and desperate motion as flames consume homes, shops, warehouses, churches, and memories built across generations, leaving behind only blackened skeletons of chimneys, glowing ash, and drifting embers carried far across the city, igniting new blazes faster than human effort can suppress, because firefighting tools remain primitive, relying on bucket chains, leather pumps, and demolition efforts that struggle against wind speed, density, and scale, forcing authorities to order entire buildings demolished with gunpowder to create firebreaks, a painful decision sacrificing property to save larger districts, illustrating harsh emergency ethics where individual loss becomes necessary for collective survival, while thousands camp in fields, open spaces, and riverbanks, watching helplessly as their livelihoods vanish into smoke and glowing ruin. Feeling shock, disbelief, grief, and strange numbness as familiar streets disappear, transforming identity, memory, and orientation overnight, because when physical landscapes vanish, emotional anchors dissolve, leaving individuals temporarily unmoored from sense of belonging and continuity. Yet even within devastation emerges remarkable cooperation. Neighbors share food, shelter, tools, and information. Strangers assist one another without expectation of reward, demonstrating social resilience that surfaces during extreme crisis, revealing deeper layers of communal instinct often hidden beneath everyday competition and routine. And when the fire finally subsides after several days, leaving vast stretches of the city flattened, smoldering, and silent, the scale of destruction becomes clear. Thousands of buildings erased, tens of thousands displaced, and entire economic networks disrupted, requiring massive rebuilding efforts that stretch across decades, reshaping architecture, regulation, street planning, and safety codes as timber construction gives way to brick and stone. Wider streets emerge, improved fire breaks and standardized building practices slowly reduce future risk, while architects, surveyors, and laborers flood the ruins, transforming ash into foundation and blueprint into reality, guided by evolving urban design principles that prioritize order, accessibility, and durability, marking a gradual transition from medieval chaos toward early modern structure, even as financial burdens fall heavily upon property owners, tenants, and merchants, many of whom never fully recover, forcing migration, career changes, and generational shifts in social mobility, while insurance industries begin emerging in response to risk awareness, demonstrating how disaster catalyzes economic innovation alongside human suffering. And psychologically, the fire imprints itself deeply into collective memory, serving as cautionary legend, moral lesson, and symbol of rebirth, fueling sermons, literature, art, and civic identity, reinforcing narratives of divine judgment, human humility, and communal perseverance, shaping how future generations interpret hardship and recovery. And as rebuilt neighborhoods rise from scorched ground, residents slowly repopulate streets, reopening shops, schools, taverns, and churches, restoring daily rhythms. Those scars remain embedded within street alignments, building materials, and personal stories whispered to children and grandchildren, reminding them of fragility and renewal, while survivors carry subtle behavioral changes, storing valuables carefully, maintaining greater fire vigilance, supporting communal safety rules, and respecting building codes more strictly, because lived trauma reshapes habits long after visible damage disappears, illustrating how cities evolve not only through planning but through emotional memory encoded into collective behavior. And within this renewed urban fabric, social life continues to evolve. Trade expands, global connections deepen, and intellectual curiosity grows alongside scientific inquiry, political debate, and artistic expression, gradually moving society toward enlightenment thinking, though superstition remains deeply rooted, creating transitional tension between old belief systems and emerging rationalism, shaping cultural discourse across coffeehouses, salons, printing presses, and academic circles, where ideas circulate faster than ever before, altering how citizens perceive authority, knowledge, and possibility, while ordinary workers remain Grounded in practical survival, balancing innovation with tradition, navigating changing economic opportunities while maintaining community bonds built upon shared experience of rebuilding hardship and endurance. And as evening once again settles over newly constructed streets lined with brick facades reflecting warm candlelight through glass windows replacing fragile timber frames, the city exhales quietly, carrying forward layered memory of destruction, resilience, adaptation, and hope, forming a living testimony to human capacity for recovery, where catastrophe becomes catalyst and loss becomes foundation for renewal, embedding deeper appreciation for stability, patience, and collective responsibility within London's evolving identity that continues shaping its rhythm for generations beyond the 17th century. As rebuilt streets gradually settle into familiar rhythm beneath brick walls and steadier foundations, the invisible architecture of social hierarchy continues shaping every movement, interaction, and opportunity within 17th-century London, where wealth determines comfort, safety, education, and influence, while poverty defines exposure, vulnerability, and constant negotiation with scarcity, creating parallel realities existing only steps apart as grand townhouses display polished brass knockers, heavy doors guarded by servants, and interior spaces filled with upholstered furniture, fine china, imported fabrics, and warming fireplaces where elite families discuss trade, politics, marriage alliances, and property investments, while outside narrow courts and alleys remain crowded with laborers, widows, orphans, migrants, and aging workers packed into damp rooms, sharing beds, rotating shifts for sleep, and relying on informal economies of small repairs, hawking, scavenging, laundering, and childcare to survive daily needs, forming resilient micro-communities bound by necessity, trust, and shared hardship, even as conflict occasionally erupts over noise, theft, space, or scarce resources, illustrating how density magnifies tension alongside cooperation. And within the middle ranks, shopkeepers, clerks, craftsmen, and skilled trades occupy fragile stability, balancing rent, inventory, taxes, apprentices, wages, and market fluctuations, striving upward through reputation, reliability, and saving while fearing downward collapse from illness, fire, theft, or economic downturn, demonstrating how social mobility exists yet remains precarious, demanding constant vigilance, discipline, and calculated risk, while class boundaries express themselves through clothing, accent, posture, education, and leisure choices, enabling instant visual identification, reinforcing social sorting mechanisms that influence trust, marriage, credit, and legal outcomes, shaping long-term life trajectories from childhood onward, and crime emerges naturally within this unequal ecosystem as survival, pressure, temptation, and opportunity intersect. Pickpockets weave expertly through crowded markets, slicing purse strings with practiced fingers, while housebreakers target poorly secured dwellings under cover of darkness, and confidence tricksters exploit trust, desperation, and illiteracy, manipulating contracts, weights, measures, and false identities, while organized gangs operate in certain districts, bribing watchmen, fencing stolen goods, and intimidating rivals, creating informal power structures parallel to official authority, yet punishments remain severe. Public hangings, whippings, branding, transportation, and imprisonment serve as deterrent theater, reinforcing moral order through spectacle, where crowds gather not only for justice but entertainment, gossip, and emotional release, revealing complex social psychology where violence becomes normalized through ritualized exposure, while also reinforcing fear and conformity. And prisons themselves remain overcrowded, unsanitary, and corrupt, where inmates must pay for food, bedding, and privileges, leading to suffering that often exceeds original crimes, reinforcing class injustice because wealthy offenders can secure better treatment or avoid incarceration altogether, while poor prisoners endure extreme hardship, shaping public perception of law as both necessary and unequal, fueling resentment and quiet resistance alongside acceptance. And as daylight fades, social activity shifts toward taverns, alehouses, and coffeehouses, which function as social hubs where workers unwind, share news, debate politics, gamble, sing, and negotiate business, creating vibrant micro-public spheres that foster information exchange, identity formation, and collective opinion long before modern media emerges, while alcohol consumption remains widespread as a coping mechanism for physical exhaustion, emotional stress, and cold Climate, though excessive drinking fuels domestic conflict, accidents and health issues, adding layers of social complexity to everyday life, and coffeehouses attract merchants, intellectuals, writers and scientists offering stimulating conversation, access to newspapers and emerging ideas about reason, trade, exploration and governance, contributing to early Enlightenment culture gradually shifting thought patterns away from purely religious frameworks toward empirical inquiry and debate, while still coexisting with superstition and tradition, creating cultural hybridity that defines transitional societies. And after nightfall the city transforms as lanterns flicker, shadows deepen and sound carries farther through narrow streets, increasing perceived danger, while watchmen patrol calling hours, rattling staffs and occasionally intervening in disputes, though crime remains higher after dark, encouraging residents to travel in groups, carry concealed weapons and memorize safe routes, while prostitutes operate openly in certain districts despite legal prohibition, reflecting persistent demand, economic desperation and moral ambiguity, shaping hidden economies that authorities tolerate inconsistently depending on enforcement priorities and political climate. And the psychological atmosphere of nighttime amplifies imagination, fear and vulnerability as darkness conceals intent, identity and movement, making every footstep echo with potential threat, yet also offering anonymity, freedom and escape for those constrained by daytime roles, creating dual identity spaces where individuals behave differently under cover of shadow, exploring risk, pleasure, secrecy and rebellion, while candlelit windows glow softly, revealing fragments of private domestic worlds where families pray, read, mend clothing, tell stories and quietly process their lives, forming intimate sanctuaries against the vast unpredictable city outside, reinforcing emotional resilience through routine, closeness and shared ritual. And across all classes the desire for dignity, stability, love and meaning persists, regardless of material conditions, shaping marriages, friendships, patronage networks and community rituals like weddings, funerals, festivals and religious observance, providing emotional anchors within unstable environments, enabling people to endure hardship with purpose, continuity and hope, weaving human experience into enduring cultural fabric that outlives individual lifespans and sustains societal memory across generations. As the city continues its steady breathing through seasons of fog, rain, heat and frost, the intimate worlds of family, childhood, education and belief quietly shape the inner lives of Londoners, forming emotional foundations that determine how individuals interpret hardship, hope, authority and identity from earliest memory onward, where children grow surrounded by constant noise, crowding, labor and responsibility, learning quickly that survival requires awareness, obedience and contribution rather than prolonged innocence, because many begin working as young as 6 or 7, assisting parents, fetching water, minding siblings, selling small goods or apprenticing into trades, absorbing adult rhythms early, which accelerates maturity yet compresses childhood play into brief spontaneous moments carved between duties, where imagination thrives through simple objects, scraps of wood, chalk, stones, fabric, transforming alleys into kingdoms, markets into adventure trails and rooftops into lookout towers, nurturing creativity, resilience and social negotiation skills essential for navigating dense environments, while formal education remains limited, largely available to boys of wealthier families through grammar schools, church instruction or private tutors focusing on reading, writing, arithmetic, Latin scripture and moral discipline, preparing them for clerical, mercantile or administrative careers, while most children learn practically through observation, imitation and oral tradition, inheriting occupational knowledge, values and survival strategies from parents and neighbors, reinforcing generational continuity while also limiting social mobility for those lacking access to formal literacy and networks. Yet informal literacy spreads gradually through printed pamphlets, cheap broadsheets and public readings in taverns and markets, exposing wider populations to news stories, religious debates and sensational events, shaping curiosity and shared cultural reference points beyond direct experience, and within households, family structure centers around economic cooperation rather than purely emotional bonding, as marriages often function as strategic partnerships balancing dowries, labor compatibility, reputation, and survival potential, though affection develops through shared endurance, mutual reliance, and daily collaboration, forming deep, quiet intimacy expressed more through action than words, while extended families often live nearby or within same dwellings, providing childcare, elder support, skill transmission, and emotional continuity, strengthening community resilience, though overcrowding also fuels tension, conflict, and lack of privacy, requiring constant negotiation of space boundaries and authority roles, shaping interpersonal dynamics and conflict resolution habits from young age, while gender roles remain clearly defined yet fluid in practice as women manage household finances, brewing, sewing, childcare, market sales, and sometimes independent business operations, contributing significantly to family income, though legal rights remain restricted, limiting property ownership, inheritance, and political voice, reinforcing structural inequality while still recognizing women's essential economic, labor, and social influence within neighborhoods, and religious life permeates daily routine, shaping moral codes, timekeeping, community organization, and psychological coping, as church bells regulate hours, sermons interpret events through divine lens, and rituals mark life transitions, baptism, marriage, burial, reinforcing collective identity and shared meaning, frameworks that provide comfort during uncertainty, while religious divisions between Anglican, Puritan, Catholic, and dissenting groups create political tension, social surveillance, and occasional persecution, shaping cautious public expression of belief and reinforcing conformity pressures, while private faith practices adapt quietly within households, balancing sincerity, safety, and tradition, and prayer, reading Scripture, and attending services serve not only spiritual functions but social networking, information exchange, and charitable coordination, strengthening communal ties while reinforcing hierarchy through seating arrangements, patronage, and clergy authority, shaping social order within sacred space, and psychologically individuals internalize strong sense of duty, restraint, humility, and perseverance, believing suffering carries moral significance, shaping emotional regulation, discouraging excessive complaint, encouraging stoicism, patience, and acceptance, which supports social stability yet suppresses emotional vulnerability, leading individuals to process grief, anxiety, and desire internally through prayer, routine, and distraction rather than open discussion, while storytelling, lullabies, and folk tales provide emotional release, imaginative escape, and moral instruction, transmitting cultural memory across generations, reinforcing identity continuity while offering comfort during long, dark winters. When daylight fades early and indoor confinement increases interpersonal intensity, and as children grow into adolescence, apprenticeships, service, domestic labor, and early marriage structure life trajectories, quickly limiting prolonged exploration yet building practical competence, responsibility, and social embeddedness, early enabling society to reproduce functional roles efficiently within dense urban systems while also perpetuating inequality patterns across generations. And despite limited leisure, organized recreation still exists through seasonal festivals, fairs, religious holidays, music, dancing, and communal meals, offering periodic release from routine, reinforcing social bonds, joy, and shared memory, providing emotional replenishment essential for sustaining long-term resilience. And as families settle each evening around hearths, whispering prayers, sharing bread, exchanging stories, mending clothing, and preparing for tomorrow's labor, the quiet emotional core of London life unfolds beneath the louder narratives of trade, disaster, politics, and crime, reminding that civilization rests ultimately upon countless small domestic moments of care, cooperation, teaching patience, forgiveness, and hope, weaving invisible threads that bind individual lives into collective continuity across time. As London's river continues carrying ships toward distant horizons, the city's identity expands beyond its narrow streets into a growing web of global exchange, linking ordinary citizens to faraway lands they may never see, yet unknowingly influence through daily consumption, labor, and imagination, because each barrel unloaded at the docks, each crate opened in a warehouse, each unfamiliar spice tasted in a kitchen carries invisible stories of ocean storms, foreign ports, cultural encounters, conflict, Cooperation and human ambition weaving London into the early fabric of global commerce where merchants calculate profit routes, insurance risk and political alliances while sailors return with sun-darkened skin, foreign words, strange habits and tales of towering cities, unknown animals and dangerous seas, fueling curiosity, wonder, fear and aspiration among listeners in taverns and marketplaces where imagination stretches beyond local geography, reshaping how people conceptualize the world, shifting from insular village-based identity toward expanding planetary awareness, even if distorted by rumor, exaggeration and limited maps, and trade transforms daily life materially as sugar sweetens tea, tobacco becomes fashionable, coffee enters social culture, spices diversify cooking, cotton fabrics replace rough wool and imported porcelain replaces simple clay, altering sensory experience, taste, texture and status, signaling while simultaneously tying households to colonial labor systems, exploitation, slavery and geopolitical competition, though most citizens remain unaware of ethical dimensions, focusing primarily on affordability, novelty and comfort, illustrating how economic systems obscure distant human cost from local consumption, shaping moral blind spots that persist across centuries, and the growth of financial institutions, insurance companies, joint stock ventures, stock trading and banking accelerates risk management, investment and wealth accumulation, enabling large-scale projects, exploration, infrastructure and military expansion, while creating new class divisions between capital holders and wage laborers, shifting power dynamics gradually from aristocracy toward merchant capitalism, reshaping political influence, urban development and social aspiration, where wealth becomes increasingly tied to commerce rather than land ownership, altering class mobility patterns and cultural values toward efficiency, calculation, innovation and competition, and coffeehouses emerge as nerve centers of information exchange where shipping schedules, commodity prices, scientific experiments, political pamphlets and philosophical debates circulate freely, encouraging analytical thinking, skepticism and evidence-based reasoning alongside rumor and speculation, creating early public intellectual culture that democratizes idea circulation, though access remains limited by literacy, gender and class, and printed newspapers slowly standardize shared narratives of events, enabling collective awareness across neighborhoods, shaping public opinion, identity and political engagement, fostering sense of belonging to larger national and imperial story rather than solely local parish identity, expanding psychological horizons and altering how individuals locate themselves within historical flow, and scientific curiosity grows through observation, experimentation and documentation as natural philosophers study astronomy, anatomy, physics, chemistry and biology, questioning traditional authority and superstition while still constrained by religious doctrine and limited technology, creating transitional worldview, blending faith and reason, shaping early Enlightenment momentum, influencing education, navigation, medicine, engineering and agriculture, slowly improving living standards though unevenly distributed across population, and artistic expression evolves through literature, theater, music and visual arts, reflecting social change, exploring themes of ambition, morality, power, identity and human complexity, providing emotional mirror to collective experience, while theaters attract diverse audiences, enabling shared storytelling rituals that cross class boundaries, temporarily dissolving hierarchy within performance spaces, fostering empathy, imagination and cultural cohesion, and as exposure to diversity increases through imported goods, foreign visitors, translated texts and travel accounts, curiosity expands, but also fear, prejudice and xenophobia emerge, reflecting tension between openness and protectionism, shaping immigration attitudes, religious tolerance policies and national identity narratives, illustrating how globalization generates both enrichment and anxiety within societies navigating rapid change. And for ordinary Londoners, these transformations manifest subtly through new tastes, conversations, aspirations and opportunities, gradually altering daily routines, career paths and social expectations, where sons may dream of merchant ventures, daughters of improved marriage prospects. Apprentices of independent businesses reflecting shifting opportunity structures while still constrained by rigid hierarchy and limited capital access, and psychologically individuals begin perceiving time as progressive rather than purely cyclical, recognizing potential for improvement, innovation and expansion, fostering optimism, ambition and future-oriented planning, though tempered by persistent risk, disease, war and disaster, creating balanced realism rather than naive idealism. And as evening descends once again over bustling docks, warehouses, glowing lanterns and murmuring coffeehouses, the city hums with layered energy of tradition and transformation, where old timber memories coexist with brick ambition and distant horizons, shaping a metropolis quietly preparing to enter modernity, carrying forward collective learning, curiosity, resilience and adaptive capacity into centuries yet unseen. As the city eases toward deeper night, the sharp edges of daylight soften and London's presence becomes less visual and more sensory, guided by sound, scent and subtle motion, as footsteps, slow voices lower and lantern flames flicker gently in the cooling air, allowing the city's true nighttime character to emerge, not as chaos but as a layered hush where distant tavern murmurs blend with the soft clatter of closing shutters, the rhythmic creak of wooden signs swaying overhead and the faint splash of oars along the Thames, where boats glide quietly beneath bridges carrying late cargo or solitary travelers whose silhouettes dissolve into fog, while church bells toll the hour slowly, each note stretching into darkness, marking time like a steady heartbeat, reassuring restless minds that order persists even when streets grow shadowed and uncertain and smells drift differently now as heat fades, allowing cool damp stone to release earthy scents, mixing with river mist, extinguished candles, spent coal and fading food aromas, forming a softer palate than daytime sharpness, while occasional gusts carry faint sweetness of bread from late ovens or bitter tang of tallow, reminding sleepers of nourishment and shelter, anchoring comfort within vulnerability. And within homes, candlelight dims, casting long shadows across walls stained by generations of smoke, where families settle into stillness, children curl together, parents stretch weary limbs, and breath slows naturally, guided by fatigue rather than intention, while whispered prayers drift upward, asking protection through the night, reflecting psychological need for reassurance against unseen dangers, as darkness heightens imagination, amplifying every sound into potential threat, yet familiarity tempers fear, because routine repetition builds trust that night will pass as it always has despite past disasters, embedding confidence through lived experience. And in alleyways rats scurry softly, paws clicking against stone, a reminder of ever-present life beneath human order, while cats patrol silently, guardians of granaries and kitchens, maintaining delicate ecological balance, unrecognized yet vital, and watchmen's calls echo intermittently, their voices distorted by distance, fog and walls, creating ghost-like announcements of time and safety. Though their presence is imperfect, it symbolizes communal effort to guard collective rest, reinforcing shared responsibility within fragile systems. And above rooftops, clouds drift slowly, revealing glimpses of moonlight that glint off chimney pots, tiles and river surface, transforming familiar structures into dreamlike silhouettes, encouraging minds to wander gently across memory, imagination and story, as fatigue loosens grip of rational thought, allowing images of past conversations, future hopes, distant places and loved faces to float softly without urgency, mirroring the city's own transition from action to rest. And the Thames continues its quiet movement, unbroken by human schedules, carrying reflections of lantern stars and bridges downstream toward the sea, its steady flow offering subconscious comfort, symbolizing continuity, persistence and calm, reminding listeners that despite individual worries, life moves forward reliably, smoothing edges of anxiety and fear. And within this nocturnal calm, sensory awareness heightens to subtle details, fabric rustling, breath shifting, wooden beams settling under cooling temperature, creating gentle pops and sighs, like the city itself exhaling, releasing accumulated tension from long labor-filled day, while mental noise softens thoughts, slow and boundaries between present and past blur, allowing imagination to drift backward through centuries, aligning listener breath with historical rhythm, fostering immersion not as observation but as participation, where you no longer watch London but inhabit it, sharing stillness with countless sleepers across time whose concerns mirror modern ones in different forms. And as sleep deepens consciousness Narrows focusing on steady breathing, warmth, weight, and gentle darkness, while city sounds recede into background, becoming indistinct hum supporting rest rather than disturbing it, guiding mind into peaceful descent where history dissolves into sensation and sensation into silence, preparing body and thought for restorative sleep, carried gently by the timeless rhythm of a city resting between one dawn and the next. As the deepest hours of night settle fully across rooftops, chimneys, riverbanks, and empty lanes, the city seems suspended between breaths, existing in a delicate balance of stillness and slow movement, where only the softest sounds remain: the distant lap of water against stone, the faint rustle of fabric as sleepers turn in their beds, the muted creak of cooling timber, and the faraway echo of a watchman's fading call dissolving into fog, creating a vast gentle quiet that wraps itself around the mind, encouraging surrender to rest while memory and imagination drift effortlessly, weaving together fragments of stories, faces, streets, laughter, sorrow, and endurance from centuries past, forming a calm tapestry of human continuity, reminding that every life, regardless of era, shares similar rhythms of waking, striving, hoping, resting, and releasing control into sleep. And in this suspended moment, the emotional weight of London's long journey softens into simple appreciation for resilience, adaptability, and shared humanity, where struggles once loud and heavy now rest quietly within historical memory, no longer demanding immediate action, allowing perspective to expand beyond individual worry into collective narrative, where millions of ordinary lives shape the city, not through grand fame but through daily persistence, kindness, cooperation, and quiet courage. And as subconscious mind absorbs these impressions, it begins integrating them into deeper layers of awareness, reinforcing feelings of safety, belonging, and continuity, reducing stress and encouraging emotional balance, while breathing remains slow, steady, and automatic, guiding nervous system toward restoration and repair. And outside, the fog thickens slightly along the river, reflecting dim lantern light into blurred halos that shimmer gently before dissolving into darkness, creating visual metaphor for how thoughts soften, blur, and fade during transition into sleep, where sharp edges lose importance and only vague comforting impressions remain, allowing mental relaxation without resistance. And distant church bells mark another passing hour, each note slower than memory itself, echoing through empty streets, reminding that time continues its patient movement regardless of individual awareness, offering reassurance that rest does not pause progress but supports renewal. And in small rooms across the city, bodies lie close, sharing warmth, breath, and subtle movement, creating invisible networks of synchronized rhythm as human organisms collectively enter restorative cycles, mirroring biological patterns across centuries, linking modern listener with historical sleepers through shared physiology of rest, repair, and dreaming, bridging time through sensation rather than intellect, while the Thames maintains its steady flow, carrying reflections of sleeping bridges, warehouses, and stars downstream, blending past and present into continuous motion, reinforcing subconscious trust, instability, and continuity. And gradually even these gentle sensory anchors recede into background awareness, leaving only internal calm, steady breath, comfortable weight, and neutral darkness as mental imagery dissolves into soft abstraction, freeing mind from narrative structure and cognitive effort, allowing neural systems to disengage from alertness into deeper regenerative states, where learning, memory, emotional processing, and physical healing occur naturally without conscious direction. And in this quiet surrender, the city's story no longer needs words, because it has settled into sensation, memory, and rhythm, becoming part of subconscious landscape rather than active thought, guiding listener into peaceful, uninterrupted sleep, carried forward gently by timeless human cadence of night dissolving into rest. As night slowly yields to the first hint of dawn, the city remains enveloped in quiet anticipation of light, where shadows soften further and the air carries the faint warmth of approaching sun filtered through lingering fog, allowing London to exhale gently after hours of stillness, while rooftops glisten faintly from dew and chimneys release thin threads of smoke curling softly upward, as if signaling the city's own awakening, yet remaining serene and unobtrusive, allowing minds to linger in liminal Space between deep sleep and gentle consciousness, and within this space the rhythm of breathing matches the subtle pulse of the streets where empty cobblestones reflect memory of yesterday's bustle and distant footsteps imagined or remembered echo faintly blending with birdsong stretching lazily across rooftops and riverbanks forming a natural lullaby linking past and present across centuries. And as the mind floats freely through this peaceful urban landscape, emotions soften, remaining unresolved tension dissolving into warmth, calm, and quiet gratitude for endurance, persistence, and shared humanity across generations, creating a foundation for rest, rejuvenation, and inner balance, while subconscious layers integrate experience, story, and sensation into memory, building resilience, empathy, and imaginative capacity without active effort, and slowly awareness of time loosens entirely, allowing perception to remain anchored only in comfort, steady breath, gentle weight, and surrounding calm as imagined river currents, drifting fog, distant bells, and softened lantern light carry a sense of timeless motion that can continue indefinitely, supporting prolonged restorative sleep while maintaining subconscious engagement with story, place, and atmosphere, providing continuity for those awakening gradually or sleeping deeply through night cycles. And if mind stirs slightly, soft loops of distant footsteps, muted church bells, river reflections, and warm candle flickers reintroduce gentle rhythm, creating natural return points without jarring transitions, preserving uninterrupted immersion while leaving no sharp cognitive demands or stress cues, encouraging seamless drift deeper into restorative states as body, mind, and imagination remain synchronized with historical rhythm, natural environment, and shared human endurance, creating perfect closure that simultaneously allows quiet re-entry into sleep should consciousness shift, completing the narrative arc from bustling life, disaster, resilience, daily labor, community, sensory immersion, reflection, and finally deep calming resolution in a continuous thread that mirrors the enduring pulse of London itself from night to dawn and beyond, ensuring that the listener feels safe, contained, connected, and gently guided toward sustained, uninterrupted rest carried by the layered echoes of centuries, river, wind, fog, smoke, and human presence intertwining in harmonious, immersive, and timeless lull. As dawn's first light creeps slowly across the rooftops and the Thames shimmers faintly beneath the early sun, the city's awakening begins again in gentle layers where sounds emerge softly and rhythmically, allowing the mind to observe without effort while streets remain mostly empty yet alive with small signs of motion. A cart rolling carefully over damp cobblestones, a baker opening a door and sliding a tray into the oven, a dog's soft bark echoing from a distant alleyway, and faint murmurs of people stirring within timber-framed homes. These details form a slow, hypnotic cadence that the subconscious absorbs effortlessly, weaving sensory immersion into the listener's own rhythm of breath and heartbeat, fostering deep relaxation as attention drifts outward and inward simultaneously, perceiving both the city's pulse and internal stillness, while the smells of damp earth, baking bread, fresh herbs, smoke, and river mist blend seamlessly, creating a layered olfactory landscape that settles the mind and encourages gentle focus on calm sensation rather than thought. Throughout the narrow streets, apprentices appear gradually, carrying tools and bundles, their movements measured, almost meditative, each step producing subtle sound against stone, wood, and puddle, echoing lightly and slowly fading into the distance, while birds chirp sporadically overhead, their wings stirring the early air, creating micro-ripples of auditory texture that lull the listener deeper into a relaxed state, where history, imagination, and sensation merge effortlessly. Residents begin their morning routines quietly, carefully, as if respecting the lingering sleep of the city, a soft collective pause that balances human activity with calm, illustrating an unspoken rhythm that continues through centuries, linking each individual to the broader urban organism in a subtle dance of breath, motion, and anticipation. Along the river, early labor unfolds without urgency, fishermen guide small boats through mist, merchants arrange wares on floating barges, and the faint splash of oars accompanies whispered negotiations and casual laughter, all blending into a soundscape of measured repetition and soft human presence that resonates with psychological safety and encourages slow, restorative breathing. Even the river itself moves deliberately, carrying reflections of sky and buildings like a gentle current of memory through time, while distant tolling bells mark hours with a pace that is steady but not demanding, rhythmical but not intrusive, reinforcing a subconscious sense of continuity, stability, and alignment with cycles of nature and human endeavor. Within homes, quiet domestic rituals, pouring water into basins, arranging fresh linens, tending embers in hearths, unfold with a grace born of necessity and habit, each action producing subtle sounds, scents, and warmth that enter the listener's awareness without requiring attention, creating the perfect backdrop for imagination to wander safely, exploring imagined corridors, hidden alleyways, and the daily lives of people centuries ago, while simultaneously rooting the body in the present. Through breath, weight, and gentle awareness of comfort. Children move softly in rooms still half dark, wrapped in blankets, their presence occasionally stirring the air, creating a feeling of intimacy and continuity that mirrors the broader city's own rhythm. The mental effect is profound, a sense of connectedness across time, a soothing reminder of human endurance, adaptability, and gentle social cohesion. In these early hours, even unseen dangers, the threat of disease, the memory of fire, poverty, or political unrest, fade into the background, acknowledged subconsciously but not active, allowing the mind to rest, explore, and absorb history without cognitive tension, supporting emotional balance, sleep readiness, and deep physiological relaxation. As daylight strengthens, merchants, laborers, and families move with quiet efficiency, but always within the city's slower, layered cadence, each sound, movement, and smell registering faintly in the listener's mind like a low, reassuring current. The combination of routine human activity, the timeless flow of the river, and the gentle sensory cues creates a hypnotic pattern that merges past and present, conscious and subconscious, allowing prolonged rest, gradual immersion into sleep, and subtle connection to the city's enduring spirit, an organic lullaby stretching naturally across hours, without abruptness or overstimulation. Even as the day progresses, occasional bursts of activity, the clatter of a cart, the creak of a sign, the distant voice of a merchant calling softly, are integrated seamlessly into the listener's perception as rhythmical, predictable events, reinforcing calm, providing gentle temporal markers, and maintaining immersive continuity. In this space, imagination, empathy, and relaxation intertwine, guiding the mind into a state where restorative sleep, historical visualization, and sensory immersion coexist, allowing extended, uninterrupted rest, perfectly suited for a multi-hour sleep history experience. As the morning deepens, sunlight filters softly through the narrow windows of timber-framed houses, falling on dust motes that float lazily in the air, creating a quiet, almost sacred atmosphere where time seems to stretch and soften, and within kitchens, the faint clink of ceramic bowls, the gentle stir of porridge, and the muted hiss of firewood being added to hearths form a subtle rhythm that the mind can follow effortlessly, guiding breathing and attention toward calm, steady patterns. While outside, street sounds rise gradually, a cart rolling slowly over wet stones, a distant hammer tapping rhythmically in a workshop, a faint cough or whisper from an open window, yet all movement is measured and predictable, reinforcing a sense of safety and continuity for the listener as the city hums in a slow, hypnotic cadence, embedding historical life into subconscious awareness without urgency or threat, allowing deep relaxation to deepen naturally. In the alleyways, pigeons flutter briefly before settling, chickens peck quietly at scattered grains, and dogs stretch, yawning, their paws brushing the damp earth, creating micro-moments of life that are both familiar and subtly engaging, forming a multisensory layer of experience that the listener absorbs gently, sensing life moving in harmony with human routine, while rooftops and chimneys cast soft shadows that shift imperceptibly with the rising sun, producing visual and imaginative cues that evoke calm observation and effortless mental wandering through centuries-old streets, absorbing textures, patterns, and rhythms without tension or distraction. Merchants prepare their small stalls with measured gestures, arranging onions, herbs, and fabrics, calling softly to early customers whose footsteps echo lightly, blending into a soundscape that mirrors gentle ocean waves or soft wind through trees, producing predictable auditory loops that the mind finds comforting. And as apprentices hurry quietly with bundles or ledgers, their motion becomes part of this immersive flow, a living rhythm that supports attention stabilization, breathing, synchronization, and progressive mental relaxation while simultaneously connecting listener imagination to historical continuity, social interaction, and the subtle poetry of ordinary life. Along the Thames, small fishing boats glide silently through misty water, oars dipping with careful precision, carrying fish, crates, and hushed conversation, while gulls hover and dip, adding soft, airy notes to the auditory environment, and the river's surface mirrors the slowly brightening sky, producing visual continuity and a subconscious sense of security and order, allowing listeners to drift further into immersion, feeling simultaneously present in their own body and mind and within the historical pulse of a living city, its rhythm slow, steady, and entirely compatible with rest, reflection, and sleep readiness. Within homes, family members move in quiet choreography, sweeping floors, stirring tea, checking fires, fetching water, adjusting bedding, and tending children, creating subtle, layered auditory and tactile stimuli that gently anchor attention while maintaining relaxation. And as the day unfolds in this careful, measured way, the mind of the listener perceives continuity, calm, and gentle motion, absorbing historical life without cognitive effort, and gradually, the body follows the rhythm. The nervous system responds with slowed heart rate and relaxed muscles, and imagination drifts freely through centuries-old streets, markets, homes, and riverbanks, producing deep, immersive sleep preparation in perfect harmony with layered historical storytelling. As the morning matures, soft sunlight spills across narrow streets, illuminating the damp cobblestones and the delicate shimmer of river mist rising from the Thames, and the air carries a mixture of warmth, wet earth, smoke from hearths, and faint aroma of baking bread, which the mind perceives subtly without effort, forming a multisensory anchor that encourages deep calm while imagination drifts along alleyways where women quietly sweep, mend clothes, or carry small baskets to market, each movement producing gentle sound, a soft scrape, a light footstep, the rustle of fabric, layered like a natural rhythm that aligns with breathing, slowing heart rate, and preparing the listener for sustained rest, while children tiptoe behind parents, holding small bundles or pets, their whispered laughter dissolving quickly into measured, predictable ambient noise that feels safe and comforting. Across the city, the soft creak of shutters being opened, the gentle splash of water in stone basins, and distant calls of market sellers form a repeating auditory tapestry, subtle enough not to disturb yet rich enough to provide immersive engagement, allowing the listener's mind to wander freely, following imagined figures moving through historical streets, observing daily life from the gentle perspective of an invisible observer, noticing small acts of care, negotiation, and cooperation, all unfolding at a slow, natural pace that mirrors the listener's own breath and internal rhythm. Along the riverbanks, fishermen prepare small nets, boats rock lightly with subtle waves, and gulls circle silently overhead, their wings barely disturbing the fog-laden air, while the Thames flows steadily, reflecting soft light, carrying the faint aroma of salt, river mud, and damp wood, forming a continuous sensory loop that the mind perceives as rhythm, continuity, and reassurance, embedding a deep sense of temporal stability and historical presence, and as carts and pedestrians move along the quays in measured, predictable patterns, the brain recognizes the quiet order of life, reinforcing subconscious trust and easing the nervous system further into relaxation. Within homes, quiet domestic activity continues. A parent stirs porridge, a child adjusts bedding, a servant sets out fresh water, and a faint candle flickers against the wall, casting slow-moving shadows that rise and fall in gentle waves, creating a hypnotic visual pattern that the mind can follow without active thought, allowing imagination to merge with calm awareness, bridging centuries, as the listener feels simultaneously grounded in the present and immersed in historical London life. Sensing textures, sounds, scents, and rhythms without needing narrative attention, producing deep restorative effect. In narrow alleys, subtle life persists. A cat pads silently over a stone roof, a bird flutters into a gutter, the faint rustle of paper or cloth drifts from half-open windows, and distant laborers begin their gentle morning tasks, their sound measured, predictable, almost meditative, blending into the larger pattern of city rhythm, and as the listener absorbs these sensory layers, mental tension dissolves gradually, leaving only calm, awareness of gentle motion, steady breathing, and the comforting knowledge of continuity, survival, and human presence through time, forming the perfect environment for deep, uninterrupted sleep. Early afternoon drifts quietly over the city, the sun rising higher but softened by drifting clouds and occasional haze from hearths and chimneys, casting gentle, diffuse light across rooftops and narrow streets, and the ambient sound of life continues in muted layers, soft footsteps over cobblestones, the scrape of a wheel against wood, distant voices murmuring agreements or greetings, the clink of coins in small hands, all forming a rhythmic backdrop that the mind receives as gentle, non-demanding continuity, reinforcing calm and encouraging the body to maintain a relaxed state while imagination glides through centuries-old markets, homes, and riverbanks, tracing each subtle motion without cognitive effort. In workshops and small shops, artisans move with deliberate care, shaping wood, metal, and cloth into functional objects, each hammer tap, saw scrape, or stitch forming a predictable sound pattern, while apprentices observe and imitate, creating a layered auditory and visual rhythm that the subconscious recognizes as harmonious, supporting mental stillness, deepening relaxation, and anchoring awareness to gentle repetition, all while providing rich, immersive context for the listener to imagine. Life in 17th-century London without urgency, tension, or distraction. Along the river, barges drift slowly, carrying crates of herbs, textiles, and foodstuffs, and the water reflects faint ripples of sunlight and shadow from nearby buildings, while gulls circle overhead, and the soft slap of oars against the hull produces a subtle, hypnotic beat, reinforcing temporal and sensory continuity that aligns naturally with breathing, encouraging deeper physiological relaxation, while the mind wanders freely across historical scenes, observing small interactions between traders, dockworkers, and passers-by, absorbing details without active engagement, producing calm immersion suitable for extended sleep preparation. Within homes, families move in quiet routines, preparing meals, tending fires, arranging bedding, and checking children, each gesture producing a faint sound or visual cue that blends seamlessly into the overall soundscape, while the smells of warm bread, boiling herbs, smoke, and damp stone drift gently through the air, creating a multisensory environment that anchors attention softly, encouraging the subconscious to track movement, sensation, and rhythm while bypassing cognitive effort, reinforcing restorative states, deepening relaxation, and supporting prolonged, uninterrupted sleep cycles. As afternoon turns slowly toward evening, shadows lengthen across alleys and rooftops, the river darkens to a muted shimmer, and distant church bells mark the passage of hours in slow, measured tones that carry far and fade gently into the city's layered soundscape, while the occasional creak of shutters, distant footsteps, or rustle of fabric remains soft and predictable, providing comfort through repetition and continuity. and allowing the listener's mind to drift seamlessly between past and present, imagination and awareness, historical context and embodied sensation, producing the perfect immersive flow for deep sleep, emotional calm, and prolonged restorative rest. As evening slowly deepens, lanterns flicker to life along narrow streets, casting soft, dancing shadows across walls, cobblestones, and rooftops, while faint smoke rises from remaining hearths and mingles with the cool river air, creating a gentle, layered scent of wood, coal, and damp stone that the mind absorbs passively, encouraging deep mental relaxation, a slow heartbeat, and steady breathing, while the imagination drifts through quiet domestic scenes, tavern interiors, and empty alleyways, observing life without urgency, fully immersed in the layered rhythms of a city at rest. The soundscape evolves subtly, distant voices from taverns soften, wooden carts creak lightly as they make their final deliveries, the ripple of the river whispers against moored boats, and the occasional bird or dog adds soft punctuation, all forming a predictable, hypnotic pattern that the subconscious interprets as safety and continuity, reinforcing calm and supporting restorative physiological states while historical scenes unfold effortlessly in the mind's eye, blending human presence, natural elements, and architectural textures into a cohesive sensory tapestry. In homes, families complete evening routines, sweeping floors, tidying tables, checking fires, settling children, and whispering quiet prayers, each gesture producing faint, repetitive sounds that enter the listener's awareness as gentle anchors for relaxation, while smells of cooked food, wax, and damp wood rise subtly, creating a multisensory cocoon that encourages imagination to wander safely across centuries-old streets, markets, riverbanks, and workshops, connecting the listener to past rhythms of life while their body and mind align with slow, restorative sleep patterns. Along the Thames, night boats drift silently, their oars dipping in soft, consistent patterns, carrying cargo, passengers, or fishermen returning from quiet work, while reflections shimmer on the water in muted golds and silvers, forming a gentle visual loop that the mind can track effortlessly, reinforcing calm focus without requiring attention or active thought, and embedding a subtle temporal structure that mirrors natural circadian rhythm, guiding deep, immersive rest as the listener absorbs both the sensory richness and historical continuity of the city. In alleyways, cats move quietly, rats scurry gently, and faint footsteps echo softly as the few remaining night workers complete their tasks, creating layered, low-volume environmental sounds that the brain perceives as predictable and non-threatening, enhancing safety perception, promoting parasympathetic nervous system activity, and encouraging deeper stages of sleep while allowing the imagination to flow through detailed historical observation, connecting personal sensation to centuries of urban human experience in a seamless, hypnotic rhythm. As night approaches its deepest hours, the city breathes as one living organism, chimneys exhale thin threads of smoke, the river glides steadily, occasional distant bells toll slowly, and the faintest wind moves over rooftops and through narrow streets, blending all sensory input into a gentle, continuous flow that aligns perfectly with the listener's breath, heartbeat, and muscle relaxation, producing a fully immersive, restorative environment where historical London life, sensory richness, and deep mental calm converge, enabling uninterrupted sleep and profound subconscious integration of story, sensation, and relaxation into a timeless, soothing rhythm that can carry the listener through hours of restful slumber. As the deepest part of night settles fully, rooftops, alleyways, and riverbanks are bathed in soft darkness punctuated only by occasional lantern glow, moonlight, and faint star reflections, creating a calming visual rhythm that the mind tracks effortlessly while the body relaxes further, muscles releasing tension, heart rate slowing, and breath deepening naturally, allowing imagination to drift freely through imagined streets, markets, and workshops of centuries past, observing quiet activity, small gestures, and subtle interactions that form an immersive, hypnotic narrative without cognitive demand. In kitchens and homes, faint sounds of late-night care continue, a pot being stirred quietly, embers shifting softly in the hearth, a blanket being adjusted over sleeping children, and the occasional whisper or creak, all entering awareness gently, forming predictable patterns that soothe the nervous system, reinforce safety, and encourage parasympathetic activation, while smells of faint smoke, dried herbs, baked bread, and cool stone air layer subtly, creating a multisensory cocoon in which the listener's mind can wander through historical detail without effort, connecting sensation to imagination and deepening relaxation. The Thames glides silently, water lapping faintly against moored boats, carrying reflections of dim lanterns and moonlight along its rippling surface, producing an auditory and visual rhythm that the subconscious perceives as continuous and predictable, providing a calming anchor for attention while the imagination explores riverfront warehouses, small trading vessels, fishermen, and passers-by, embedding historical awareness into restful states and supporting prolonged deep sleep as the city's quiet pulse aligns with the listener's internal rhythms. Along alleys and streets, occasional soft movements, cats padding, rats scurrying gently, distant workers finishing tasks, add faint, low-volume textures that enrich the immersive soundscape without alerting or disturbing the mind, reinforcing feelings of safety, continuity, and gentle motion while maintaining historical realism, allowing the listener to inhabit the city imaginatively, sensing its textures, smells, and rhythms fully without cognitive effort, producing immersive relaxation. Suitable for extended sleep periods. In taverns, closed or nearly empty, faint residual sounds linger, the shuffle of a chair, soft clinking of utensils, the subtle murmur of a late visitor or apprentice, all absorbed subconsciously as rhythmical, predictable stimuli that deepen calm while offering glimpses into daily life centuries ago, creating a continuous narrative of ordinary existence that fosters empathy, imagination, and connection across time, while the body remains comfortably grounded in the present, weight supported, muscles relaxed, and breathing slow and steady. High above, rooftops and chimneys exhale occasional threads of smoke, moonlight shifts imperceptibly across tiles and shingles, and gentle winds stir leaves and dust in soft, repeating patterns, producing layered sensory input that the mind tracks effortlessly as hypnotic, non-demanding rhythm, supporting restorative sleep cycles, deeper parasympathetic activity, and subtle subconscious absorption of historical context, allowing the listener to merge past and present experience into a peaceful, immersive dreamlike environment. As the city rests fully, all sensory layers, the distant river, flickering lanterns, faint domestic activity, animal movements, soft wind, subtle smells, blend into a continuous, gentle, immersive flow that aligns naturally with breathing, heartbeat, and internal body rhythm, producing profound mental calm, uninterrupted sleep readiness, and deep restorative states, while imagination floats freely across centuries-old streets, homes, markets, and riverbanks, absorbing history without effort, creating a timeless, immersive lull that can carry the listener seamlessly through hours of peaceful slumber, fully integrating story, sensation, and restorative rest into a cohesive, hypnotic rhythm. As midnight stretches deeper, shadows settle fully across narrow streets, rooftops, and riverbanks, blending soft darkness with the faint glow of occasional lanterns, creating a hypnotic visual environment where shapes and textures are suggested rather than sharply defined, and the mind absorbs this gently, allowing imagination to roam freely through quiet alleyways, empty markets, and the still, reflective surface of the Thames, sensing life without urgency while muscles relax, breathing deepens, and heart rate slows naturally, creating optimal conditions for restorative sleep and immersive subconscious absorption of historical context. The faint sounds of domestic activity persist, the subtle scrape of a broom, the gentle stir of a pot, the soft sigh of a settling child, and distant, almost imperceptible voices, all blending into a rhythm that the subconscious recognizes as familiar, safe, and predictable, forming a calming loop that aligns seamlessly with the listener's internal state, while smells of faint smoke, warm bread, herbs, and damp stone rise softly, producing a multisensory environment that deepens immersion, encourages mental wandering, and supports uninterrupted sleep. Along the river, small fishing boats and barges move slowly, oars dipping in rhythmical, gentle patterns, water lapping quietly against hulls and piers, and the occasional soft call of a bird or distant human produces layered, low-volume textures that enhance auditory richness without alerting or disturbing, while reflections of lanterns and moonlight ripple softly across the Thames, reinforcing temporal continuity and a hypnotic visual flow that encourages parasympathetic activation, deep relaxation, and immersive engagement with the city's historical pulse. In workshops and markets, faint residual sounds of labor continue, a hammer tapping softly on metal, the gentle scrape of cloth or wood, whispered exchanges between early risers, and footsteps over cobblestones, all integrated seamlessly into the surrounding calm, forming a pattern the mind perceives as safe, predictable, and soothing, allowing imagination to explore historical details without active effort while maintaining deep relaxation, physiological calm, and readiness for extended sleep. Cats pad silently along rooftops, rats scurry softly in alleys, and occasional soft wind stirs leaves, dust, and loose papers, producing subtle auditory and tactile cues that enhance sensory immersion, while moonlight and dim lantern glow shift imperceptibly across walls and cobblestones, creating visual rhythms that the brain registers effortlessly, reinforcing calm, temporal continuity, and immersive engagement, allowing the listener to inhabit centuries-old streets fully without tension or cognitive demand. Within homes, gentle evening routines continue unobtrusively. A parent adjusts bedding, a child stirs slightly before settling again, a pot simmers quietly, and faint candle flicker casts slow-moving shadows, all producing multisensory anchors for relaxation, while historical imagination merges seamlessly with present bodily sensation, deepening immersion, encouraging slow, rhythmic breathing, and allowing mental tension to dissolve gradually, preparing for restorative, uninterrupted sleep. Cycles. As night progresses toward its deepest phase, the city's layered sensory environment, river reflections, flickering lanterns, muted domestic activity, soft animal movement, distant bells, gentle wind, and subtle aromas, blends into a continuous, hypnotic flow, aligning naturally with the listener's internal rhythms, reinforcing feelings of safety, continuity, and calm, and allowing imagination to drift effortlessly through centuries of human experience, observing ordinary life without urgency or stress, producing profound relaxation, emotional balance, and deep restorative states. Even in the quietest moments, the subtle pulse of the city remains present, the river flows steadily, distant echoes of life drift softly across streets, lanterns flicker, chimneys release thin threads of smoke, and moonlight shifts imperceptibly across rooftops, forming a continuous, layered, immersive lull that guides mind, body, and imagination toward uninterrupted rest, integrating historical context, sensory richness, and slow, hypnotic rhythm into a seamless environment for deep, restorative sleep that can carry the listener across hours of peaceful slumber without disturbance. As the night deepens further, the city lies in near total stillness, the occasional flicker of a distant lantern or shadow of a rooftop bird providing subtle movement that the mind tracks effortlessly, while rooftops, alleys, and riverbanks absorb moonlight in soft, muted tones, forming a visual rhythm that encourages mental wandering, deep relaxation, and synchronized breathing, allowing the listener to feel both immersed in historical London and fully anchored in present bodily comfort. Along the Thames, the river flows silently, rippling gently against piers and moored boats, reflecting lantern glow and pale moonlight in patterns that shift slowly and predictably, producing a hypnotic visual and auditory loop that supports parasympathetic activation, deep muscle relaxation, and sustained readiness for sleep, while imagination drifts through centuries-old river scenes, observing fishermen, merchants, and floating barges, absorbing subtle human activity without cognitive effort. In narrow streets, faint domestic and occupational sounds continue softly, a broom scraping gently, the muted closing of shutters, whispered voices carried lightly through alleys, and the distant creak of a cart or wheel, all blending into layered textures that the subconscious interprets as familiar, safe, and orderly, reinforcing feelings of calm, temporal continuity, and immersive engagement, while sensory input of faint smoke, baking bread, herbs, and cool stone further enriches the environment for prolonged, restorative sleep. Within homes, soft routines unfold unobtrusively. Parents adjust bedding, children stir briefly before settling, embers shift in hearths, and candlelight flickers along walls and ceilings, producing slow-moving shadows that the brain registers effortlessly as calming visual rhythm, while subtle tactile and olfactory cues anchor awareness in comfort and safety, allowing mental wandering through historical streets, riverbanks, markets, and workshops, while physiological systems respond with deep relaxation, slower heartbeat, and regulated breathing. High above, rooftops and chimneys exhale thin threads of smoke, moonlight shifts gently across tiles, leaves rustle softly in the wind, and distant church bells toll slowly and rhythmically, blending all sensory layers into a continuous, immersive experience, producing subconscious entrainment, emotional balance, and profound restorative effect while imagination observes historical life, interactions, and ordinary human gestures, connecting the listener across centuries without tension or cognitive strain. The faint rustle of nocturnal animals, cats padding silently along roofs, rats scurrying lightly in alleyways, birds shifting in the dark, add subtle textural cues to the auditory environment, creating hypnotic repetition and pattern sound that enhances mental immersion, supports parasympathetic activation, and reinforces the timeless, continuous rhythm of the city, allowing the listener's mind to flow naturally into deeper stages of sleep. Lanterns along streets and riverbanks flicker softly as shadows shift imperceptibly, producing visual loops that harmonize with auditory cues and tactile sensations, guiding attention gently toward calming repetition without cognitive demand, while distant voices, muted footsteps, and soft domestic movements provide layered historical context, allowing imagination to explore centuries-old life without urgency, producing deep relaxation and subconscious absorption of story, environment, and rhythm simultaneously. Even as subtle city life continues, boats moving quietly on the river, faint sound of oars, soft clinks in workshops, whispers in alleys, the predictability, volume, and rhythm of activity reinforce mental safety, continuity, and calm, allowing imagination to drift effortlessly through historical London streets and homes while body and mind respond naturally with slower heart rate, steady breathing, relaxed muscles, and increased parasympathetic tone. The combination of visual, auditory, tactile, and olfactory cues, from river ripples, lantern glow, chimney smoke, wind rustling leaves, faint footsteps, animal movement, and domestic sounds, forms a multisensory cocoon that immerses the listener fully in historical life while supporting deep restorative sleep, emotional calm, and subconscious integration of story, rhythm, and sensation across hours of uninterrupted rest. Finally, as the night progresses toward early morning, moonlight fades gently, fog lifts softly from the river, lanterns are extinguished one by one, and the city breathes quietly as a living organism, its rhythm continuous, predictable, and hypnotic, aligning with the listener's internal body rhythm, producing profound, uninterrupted sleep, immersive historical connection, and seamless subconscious absorption of centuries-old life, daily routines, sensory textures, and human resilience. Providing perfect closure while still allowing gentle loops of rhythm and sensation to guide prolonged restorative rest, completing the full immersive experience of London in the 1600s from night into dawn. As London streets awaken slowly with dawn, the city hums with subtle rhythm as timber-framed houses release faint smoke, the Thames ripples quietly, and cobblestones glisten with morning dew, forming an environment where each sensory detail, the smell of baking bread, damp stone, and coal smoke, the soft creak of shutters, the distant call of merchants, anchors the mind into calm, steady breathing while imagination drifts effortlessly through centuries-old streets observing daily life without urgency, embedding historical awareness into restful states. Footsteps echo softly over cobblestones, carts roll gently along narrow streets, and distant voices murmur lightly, creating layered, predictable sound patterns that soothe the nervous system, encourage parasympathetic activation, and allow the listener to relax deeply, while families move unobtrusively in homes, adjusting bedding, stirring pots, and whispering to children, producing faint sounds that serve as gentle anchors for sensory immersion, supporting uninterrupted sleep. Along the Thames, boats glide silently, oars dipping in rhythmical patterns, reflections of lanterns and pale moonlight rippling across water, while gulls hover or glide softly overhead, adding subtle, low-volume cues that enhance auditory richness without alerting, fostering hypnotic flow in both imagination and physiological state, allowing deep relaxation, sustained restorative rest, and immersive historical visualization simultaneously. Workshops and markets hum faintly with gentle activity, hammers tapping, cloth being cut or folded, whispered negotiations, and distant footsteps over wooden boards and cobblestones produce predictable auditory textures, integrating seamlessly with surrounding calm, supporting deep sleep, and allowing imagination to follow historical sequences effortlessly, observing artisans, apprentices, and merchants without cognitive effort, merging sensory experience with historical immersion. In alleyways, nocturnal animals move quietly, cats pad across rooftops, rats scurry lightly, and occasional birds shift in the dark, producing subtle textural and auditory cues that enrich the immersive environment, reinforcing safety perception, continuity, and gentle rhythm while the mind drifts across centuries-old urban life, absorbing textures, smells, and interactions without stress or attention demand. Candlelight flickers in homes, shadows shift slowly across walls, and embers settle gently in hearths, producing visual and auditory patterns that guide attention softly, allowing imagination to explore interiors, streets, riverbanks, and markets while physiological relaxation deepens, heartbeat slows, muscles release tension, and breathing becomes steady, reinforcing parasympathetic dominance and restorative sleep readiness. Evening deepens, and lanterns along streets and riverbanks flicker softly, casting warm glows over timber and stone, while distant church bells toll slowly, their echoes weaving through alleyways, markets, and homes, producing a layered, predictable rhythm that the subconscious interprets as safe, familiar, and calming, aligning mind, body, and imagination into immersive flow, encouraging sustained deep sleep and subtle historical engagement. Along the Thames, barges drift slowly, water laps quietly against hulls and piers, birds glide overhead, and distant voices of late workers or fishermen remain soft and rhythmic, creating hypnotic auditory loops that guide relaxation, while reflections shimmer gently across rippling surfaces, reinforcing visual continuity and immersive engagement with centuries-old city life. High above, rooftops exhale faint smoke, moonlight shifts imperceptibly, and soft wind stirs leaves and dust, layering tactile, auditory, and visual input into a continuous, immersive flow that the mind tracks effortlessly, supporting slow, deep breathing, emotional balance, mental calm, and restorative physiological states, while imagination moves freely through London streets, homes, markets, and riverbanks, observing subtle gestures, small acts of care, and quiet human interactions without stress or cognitive effort. Domestic life continues quietly, a parent adjusts bedding, children stir briefly before settling, a pot simmers, and faint candle flicker casts slow-moving shadows, producing multisensory anchors for relaxation, while the combination of smells, smoke, baked bread, herbs, cool stone, guide sensory immersion, allowing the mind to absorb historical life naturally, producing profound calm, parasympathetic activation, and deep restorative sleep. Cats pad silently, rats move softly in alleys, birds stir occasionally, and distant footsteps or creaks in streets form subtle, predictable auditory cues, enhancing hypnotic repetition and reinforcing temporal continuity, safety, and immersive engagement, while the listener's mind drifts effortlessly across centuries of ordinary London life, absorbing textures, smells, and rhythms without cognitive strain, supporting deep restorative sleep. The layered soundscape, the ripple of the Thames, flickering lanterns, muted domestic activity, soft animal movement, distant bells, gentle wind, and subtle smells, forms a continuous, multisensory lull, aligning with breathing, heartbeat, and internal body rhythm, producing profound mental calm, uninterrupted sleep readiness, and deep restorative states while imagination merges seamlessly with historical visualization. Even in the quietest moments, the city's pulse continues, boats drift on the river, oars dip in rhythmic patterns, faint footsteps and distant voices echo softly, lanterns flicker, chimneys release thin smoke, and moonlight shifts across rooftops, creating a continuous, layered, immersive flow that guides mind, body, and imagination toward deep restorative sleep while sustaining historical context, sensory richness, and hypnotic rhythm for hours of uninterrupted slumber. As dawn approaches, fog lifts gently from the river, lanterns extinguish gradually, and the city breathes quietly as a living organism, its rhythm continuous and predictable, perfectly aligned with the listener's internal state, producing prolonged restorative sleep, immersive historical connection, and subconscious absorption of centuries-old human life, daily routines, sensory textures, and quiet resilience, providing closure while maintaining gentle loops of rhythm, ensuring the listener remains in deep, uninterrupted, restorative slumber.